Sorry about that. I just got kicked off and got reconnected.
Yep.
So I'm on?
Yes.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Paul Homeyer. I'm the chair of the Historic Resources Committee of AIA Houston. As the chair of the Historic Resources Committee and also a board member of the Heritage Society, I'm delighted that these two organizations have teamed up tonight to host a very special event, the premiere presentation of Barrie Scardino Bradley's book, Improbable Metropolis. Barrie Scardino Bradley has had a long association with both the preservation community in Houston and AIA Houston. Barrie has been a longtime supporter of the Heritage Society and served as executive director of AIA Houston and the Architecture Center Houston Foundation from 2004 to 2010. It was during her time at AIA that I got to know Barrie and witnessed her dedication to historic preservation and keen interest and expertise in architectural history. During her tenure as executive director, Barrie resurrected the dormant Historic Resources Committee and headed a committee, Mayor Bill White's task force on Houston's history, to promote ways of documenting and preserving the city's historic built environment. So given Barrie's deep experience with both AIA Houston and the Heritage Society, I can't think of a better partnership than these two organizations to host tonight's event. As a co-hosted event, there's a perk for both organizations. Book sales of autographed copies of Improbable Metropolis will benefit the Heritage Society and can be ordered through the Heritage Society website, which is heritagesociety.org. And you go to the page or the tab gift shop, and underneath the shop tab, you can find a connection to purchase a book online. Also, AIA members will receive 1.5 CEUs for attending the webinar tonight. Because of the size of the audience tonight, all participants are muted, but will have the opportunity to ask questions in writing through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Questions will be directed to Barrie at the conclusion of her talk. With that, I'll turn the mic over to my friend Minette Basil, board president of the Heritage Society, to introduce Barrie.
Thank you so much, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. As Paul said, I'm Minette Basil, president of the Heritage Society located in Sam Houston Park. And the Heritage Society, as most of you know, manages 10 historic buildings owned by the city, and we tell the stories of Houston's vast cultural and historic heritage. We are excited to co-partner with AIA to bring this important preservation topic and book to your attention in this presentation by my good friend, Barrie. It is my great honor to introduce her as a friend, a colleague, a business partner, and fellow architectural preservationist. I had the good fortune to meet Barrie the first week I came to Houston in 1982, and we instantly bonded over our love and respect for historic buildings and neighborhoods. And we set up a consulting business called Preservation Services that did a lot of good work, but somehow never seemed to make a profit. Long before Houston ever had a preservation ordinance, the internet, or digital research access, we assisted owners in the research, documentation, and photography for applications to the National Register of Historic Places and the Recorded Texas Historic Landmark Program. Some of the buildings and projects we worked on included the DePelchin Faith Home, Palmer Memorial Episcopal Church, the Wenchie Brothers Cafe in Spring, and the Main Street Market Square Historic District. With Barrie's varied background and experience, her degree in library science, her experience as research associate at Rice, and the architectural archivist at the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, she was the perfect partner to go into this business with. As we all know, Barrie has been lecturing and writing for decades and has 7 books either edited or co-edited or co-authored or authored by her. We thank the AIA for this presentation partnership, and don't forget to buy your autographed book that she will personally scribe for you. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you my friend, Barrie Scardino Bradley.
Yay. Am I on mute? Can you guys hear me?
We can hear
Hello?
you. We can hear you. Mhm.
Thanks, Manette. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Paul. And thank you, Rhonda, for making all this happen for us. We really weren't sure what we were doing. I'm going to put share screen on, and I think, Manette, you may disappear. Let's see what's going to happen here. Oh, I disappeared.
You're on the corner.
What? Oh, I see myself. Okay, what you want to see is my slideshow, right, guys? Thanks, everybody out there, for being watching. I really appreciate you tuning in. And I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about how Improbable Metropolis came about and some of the stories it tells, and show just a few of the 400 images. I've spent 3 days just trying to get it down to an hour. I hope I did. Before I move on, I do want to thank Scott Ziegler and Ziegler Cooper for this enticing cover photograph. They were wonderful in letting us use it. I moved to Houston in 1979 and had a great introduction to Houston's historic architecture by working on the Houston Architectural Survey. Fast forward to 2011 and the Celebrate Architecture exhibition for Houston's 125th anniversary, which was organized by building type. This working panel for shelter, which was one section of the exhibition, shows the evolution of Houston's residences from Ashbel Smith's rudimentary house, over obviously here, to 20th century houses, 21st century houses. The success of the exhibition prompted me to consider writing an architectural history of Houston organized like the exhibition by building types. Although the University of Texas was complimentary and gave me a contract, they and their reviewers wanted me to rewrite it in chronological order, which I did twice. Improbable Metropolis covers Houston's built environment and urban development from its pre-beginnings about 1830 to pre-Hurricane Harvey in the fall of 2017. Each of 8 chapters is titled for a Houston nickname from the era represented. Chapter 1, Bayou City, encompasses Houston's fledgling years through the Civil War. Named for the 10 bayous that course through its area, Bayou City was Houston's first and has been its most endearing nickname. Most of the first settlers came from the southeast of the United States, but in Europe, such vistas as the one seen here on the right were published to entice immigrants to the Republic of Texas. False advertising is a very old trick. Germans became the largest European group to settle in Houston in the early days, and many of them ventured on to the Texas Hill Country, which actually does look sort of like this image purported to be Houston. In the 1839 Morning Star, the Morning Star lamented that the town had a theater, had several saloons, a jail, a courthouse, but no church. Itinerant preachers held multi-denominational services in the Capitol building. In 1841, Houston had its first church built by the Presbyterians, as you can see here. An itinerant artist named Thomas Flintoff passed through town in 1852 and left several watercolors that give a good impression of what the town looked like and in color. The vernacular Southern church house type, irrespective of style, consisted of a rectangular building with a gabled roof symmetrically composed with a central door under a steeple or a tower. Flintoff's paintings, including ones of Market Square and Courthouse Square, which are also in the book, illustrate the rough conditions of the streets, the deep drainage ditches that required wooden bridges and fences to keep out stray animals. I show the Nichols Rice Cherry House in some detail to illustrate the various types of documentation used in the book for 19th century buildings before widespread photography. The Nichols Rice Cherry House was constructed in 1850 with some sophistication compared to early dwellings built in Houston's first 2 decades. Although it was of a side passage house type, an arrangement favored in row houses, its classical portico was typical of large Southern antebellum buildings. It was constructed by Ebenezer Nichols, who moved to Galveston and sold his house to his business partner, William Marsh Rice. As seen on the left in this detail from Flintoff's painting of the courthouse square, the house had double galleries wrapping it on 3 sides with fluted ionic columns. Augustus Koch's 1873 bird's eye view shows the house across from the courthouse with the usual outbuildings, a kitchen, a privy, and stable. Where's my pointer? There we go. Next slide. I should just have somebody doing next slide. I know this is a lot of information to see on one slide, but note the Nichols Rice Cherry House footprint in block 22 and the German Catholic, as St. Vincent de Paul was called, German Catholic Church on block 23 that I showed in the Flintoff painting. The buildings in yellow were wooden, the buildings in pink were brick. The Sanborn fire insurance maps have an enormous amount of information, and they continued way into the 20th century. So they are a great help for scholars and people looking at cities and architectural history. Another historical resource are drawings and photographs of the Historic American Building Survey. The floor plans on the left show the original configuration of the Nichols Rice Cherry House with no interior kitchen or bathrooms. Rice sold the house to a real estate company in 1873, and it was moved to the back of the lot to face San Jacinto, and the side galleries were removed at that time. In 1896, the artist Emma Richardson Cherry bought the house at auction for $25 because she admired the interior woodwork. She was planning to do something with the woodwork, but ended up moving the house to the Montrose area and living there. She added the peak roof, she and her husband added the peak roof, and she lived there and taught art classes in the studio until her death in 1954. The Heritage Society, founded in 1954, same year, to save the Kellam Noble House. Today, the Kellam Noble is the oldest house in Houston on its original site. It acquired the Nichols Rice Cherry House in 1957 and moved it to Sam Houston Park, where it was restored by the architect Harvin Moore in 1960. The picture on the lower right is of the house as it appears today. The slide on the left, showing the 2 blocks along the east side of Main Street in 1856, is one of the earliest photographs of Houston. The wooden shed awnings that extend over the plank sidewalks were striking features of the early downtown Houston. 2 fires in early 1859 virtually destroyed the 300 block on both sides of Main Street. As a result, a city ordinance was passed prohibiting any wood construction within 4 blocks of Main. The 1866 slide shows the same buildings in the 200 block, but in the 300 block, more substantial and architecturally sophisticated brick buildings replaced those destroyed in the 1859 fire. Mid-block, J.R. Morris rebuilt with the Renaissance Revival iron front, much like the series of buildings along the Strand in Galveston, built in the late 1850s. Today, most of the 300 block is occupied by the 10-story Harris County Administration Building. Residents began to call Houston the Magnolia City in the 1870s for the great magnolia forests along the bayous. As the cultural and romantic sensibilities of the Victorian era pervaded Houston, this fittingly evocative nickname was adopted by the city. Although Houston showed remarkable development from its pre-Civil War economy to an architectural production at the end of the 19th century, culturally, it continued to identify with the Old South and did not grow as dramatically as the great industrial cities of the Midwest. Nor did Houston share the ostentatious wealth that gave the period the sobriquet, the Gilded Age. Unlike most Southern cities, however, Houston had the advantage of emerging from the Civil War as a thriving marketplace with cotton as its major commodity. The whole Koch's 1873 view shows the extent of development as the city began to emerge from Reconstruction. Evident in this image are the railroads, busy port, and the beginnings of residential sprawl to the south of town. The first professional architects to begin to work in Houston were in the late 1870s. Houston architecture of the Victorian period can be best and probably shortest illustrated by the careers of two of Houston's foremost Victorian architects, Eugene Heiner and George Dickey. Heiner, a New Yorker, was apprenticed to a Chicago architect at age 13. And from there, he worked in Terre Haute, Indiana, and then moved permanently to Houston in 1878 after spending a year in Dallas. His buildings of the 1870s and 1880s employed the mannerisms typical of high Victorian architecture. Heiner died in and is buried in Houston. George Dickey arrived the same year, 1878, after practicing in Manchester, New Hampshire, Boston, and Toronto. Dickey received commissions for a greater variety of building types than Heiner, and Dickey's buildings were more nuanced. About 1806, Dickey moved to Nashville, Tennessee for a large project there, and then where he died in 1910. He is buried in New Orleans in the Wilson crypt of his wife's family. Eugene Heiner's flamboyant French Renaissance revival Harris County Jail launched his career as a designer of courthouses and jails throughout Texas, many of which are still extant. Houston's jail was inadequate by the 1890s, and Heiner designed the replacement for on a 4-acre site along Buffalo Bayou, where the Albert Thomas Convention Center was constructed in 1967, and it's now called Bayou Place, and it was the former site of AIA's first Houston Architecture Center. Architecture Center Houston, I guess it's called now. Houston High School displays the gaping round arches and turrets of H.H. Richardson's popular Romanesque buildings of the 1890s. And Heiner's Cotton Exchange, along with the Henry Brashear building behind the Rice Hotel, are Heiner's only buildings left standing in Houston. Dickey's flamboyance can be seen in the B.A. Shepherd building with its thrusting adicula. It's compared to that of the Centennial Bank designed by the prolific high Victorian architect Frank Furness. In Improbable Metropolis, I introduced several such comparisons to contemporary buildings in other parts of the United States to give you some context of where Houston was in building. Dickey's monumental First Presbyterian Church was clad in limestone and had Romanesque revival features also. On the interior, high vaults sprang from slender columns, and pews were in semicircular fashion known as the Akron plan, that were arranged for good acoustics and sight lines, and they were popular. That plan was very popular in Texas in Protestant churches. Heiner and Dickey, I think I skipped a page. Heiner and Dickey both designed houses for wealthy Houstonians. Dickey more than Heiner, who was busy with his courthouses all over the state. The T.H. Scanlon house was basically a boxy, picturesque Coward villa, gussied up with varied roof lines and elaborate porches. The Dick house is more complex. Dickey is also larger. The Dickey house compressed the towered villa into creating shadowed recesses with chamfered and rounded expansions rather than appended oriel and bay windows. And the prominent pyramidal roof controls picturesque massing. Perhaps Dick had a larger budget than Scanlon, allowed for the addition of the intricate roof cresting you'll notice, elaborate spindle posts, and tall chimneys. Both houses were constructed of load-bearing brick, and both were in line with all the mansions on Main Street, Upper Main Street. Electrification of Houston streetcar lines in 1891 was the key in Houston's 19th century expansion. The city had grown by annexed additions, but by the 1890s, expansion was occurring to the east and south of Houston's original boundaries. The most ambitious new development was Houston Heights, where lot sales began in 1892. It's hard to keep these dates straight, but they're important. Advertisements compared Houston Heights to Pullman, Illinois, a successful company town outside of Chicago. Similarly, the Heights was an industrial suburb with factory district, and you can see examples of factory buildings in the upper right corner of the promotional map where my face is. So you can't probably see it, at least I can't. In addition, this working class suburb was given the upper class neighborhood feature of a grand boulevard. The developers built several spec houses to plans by George Barber of Knoxville, Tennessee. Most published house plans came out of the Northeast, where the climate is very different. And Barber capitalized on the lack of ready plans for Southern builders. Fortunately, many of these houses in the Heights have been preserved. Chapter 3, Progressive Houston. Progressive Houston was the name of a local magazine published from 1909 to 1913 to extol Houston's progressive accomplishments during what was known nationally as the Progressive Era in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The economic expansion that occurred during this period was accelerated by 2 events that had altered the course of Houston's history. The Great Storm of 1900 that hit Galveston on September 8th, devastating that city and resulting in the relocation of Texas's major port to Houston. Just 4 months later, on January 10th, 1901, an unprecedented oil discovery occurred at Spindletop in Beaumont, just 80 miles east of Houston. Ambitious Houstonians took full advantage of both the tragedy of Galveston and the triumphs of Spindletop. Much of the progressive era was manifested in architecture, and local buildings were featured in the Progressive Houston magazine, such as the new City Auditorium completed in 1910, seen here on the cover of the February 1911 issue. It was demolished in the 1960s for Jones Hall. Houston's transformation into a metropolitan city of the New South began with a building program that embraced the notion that classical architecture was the most appropriate style during the Progressive Era. Several domed neoclassical buildings were erected in Houston in the first decade of the 20th century, and the nation turned away from the eclectic, fanciful Victorian era buildings. Houston's most impressive domed classical building was the county courthouse, the 3rd building built in Courthouse Square. The Dallas architectural firm of Lang & Witchell won a competition in which the rules specified that the building had to have a dome and colonnaded facades. Their associate, Charles Bartlebow, designed the 5-story building in rough-cut pink granite, Texas granite, and St. Louis brick. Although its facades met the competition requirements, the interiors revealed Bartlebow's Chicago training with less predictable Sullivan-esque and Wrightian ornamental details. An impressive marble-lined rotunda rises through the center of the building to an art glass skylight. The building had been essentially ruined with lowered ceilings, delayed maintenance, and partitions, but here we see it restored to its original grandeur. Although these buildings may not represent Houston's finest architecture of the Progressive Era, they were seminal in attracting Beaumont's oil companies to Houston, paving the way for Houston to become the energy capital of the world. Jesse H. Jones, Houston's major developer of the period, bought up and developed property all over downtown, including the 700 block of Main Street on both sides of the street. All of these buildings are still standing with new facades. Note the awnings on the Mason, Foster, and Gulf buildings on the right. This architectural device from the earliest days of Houston to protect pedestrians from heat and rain. Many other skyscrapers were built in Houston from the turn of the century to the Great Depression, when construction slowed after a 30-year boom. Transportation from the founding of Houston was a major component of its economic success. While progressive measures were taking place to reform city and county government, longstanding goal became Houston's most significant accomplishment in the Progressive Era, the creation of a deep water port. A 7-year dredging project created the waterway on Buffalo Bayou 25 feet deep. At the time, that was required for ocean-going vessels. Railroads converged on Houston from all parts of the country. They brought Texas cotton, lumber, and other commodities for profitable export. The Southern Pacific Rail yards along Washington Avenue near the docks are pictured at left with flat cars piled high with bales of cotton. The 3-story red brick building was the Southern Pacific's Grand Central Station, designed by George Dickey in 1886. Warren and Wetmore, responsible for New York's Grand Central Station, completed in 1913, designed Union Station in Houston, built for passenger and commercial service. Union Station was part of Houston's first large-scale urban redevelopment. 10 blocks of prime real estate residential property in the 3rd Ward were cleared through eminent domain. A consortium of competing railway companies formed the Houston Belt and Terminal Railway Company to compete with Southern Pacific. The 3-bay portico facing Crawford employed Guastavino tile vaulting like that in the New York station, and later in Houston's Warren and Wetmore's Texas Company building. What these images of the noble proportioned waiting room do not disclose, and what progressive movement called to public spiritedness neglected to admit, is that such spaces were not meant for everyone. This Union Station waiting room was the white waiting room. African-American passengers were legally required to use the station's separate and far less equal colored waiting room that, of course, was never photographed or put on a postcard. Union Station's rail yards were converted to Enron Field, now Minute Maid Park, in 2000, and the waiting room is now the entrance to the baseball stadium. So-called colonial revival houses were built all over the country after the 1893 Chicago World's Fair reintroduced America to neoclassical buildings. Of course, there were no houses that looked like this in colonial America. One of the many such large houses that was built in Houston, the Nash House, is strikingly similar to the Connecticut State Building at the fair. In 1920, Houston was called the heart of the oil industry, but before and during World War II, it became known as the energy capital of the world. During the 1920s, ship channel refineries, office skyscrapers, gas stations, and the houses of oil barons were constructed in an unrelenting pace in Houston, testifying to the enormous impact the petroleum industry had on Houston's built environment. Automobiles became a major factor as the city grew from its center in all directions. In 1924, Mayor Oscar Holcomb reorganized the Do Nothing Planning Commission by finally giving it adequate funding. The commission was expected to produce plans for zoning, major streets, bayou beautification, and a civic center. None of these goals was attained, but we have been left with the documents that generate some intriguing what ifs. Heiner's first civic center proposal was a 9-block neoclassical scheme with a new city hall loosely based on the Capitol in Washington. Note that the new Spanish Public Library, Spanish Mediterranean Public Library, now called the Julia Idison Building, was under construction and appears as built in both plans. This caused the commission to ask for a second set of ideas consistent with the library's architecture, the lower plan. This plan moves the Spanishy City Hall back into Sam Houston Park and required only 6 blocks. These plans never came to fruition because of the expense and difficulty in acquiring all of the land it needed. And by the time the funding for a new city hall was available, revival style architecture was unpopular. Oops. It is interesting to compare the Houston Library to the 16th century Spanish building near Madrid that Ralph Adams Cram acknowledged as its precedent. Just before the commission for the Houston Public Library, Cram had spent 6 months in Spain and was quite taken with Spanish Renaissance architecture. An abbreviated version of Cram's library was built. A 3rd wing and a reading garden on the original plans weren't constructed until the library was restored. Like the restored Harris County Courthouse, the Julia Idison Building is a gem in downtown Houston, reminding us of the time when government buildings were expected to be grand monuments. Didn't I just show that? During the 1920s and 30s, subdivisions were platted and built out in Houston for all income levels. But River Oaks still remains the Houston subdivision that's recognized throughout the country as Houston's upper class development. The most interesting house in River Oaks is the Sewell House, designed by Ralph Adams Cram, whose Rice Institute and Public Library captured the imagination of Blanche Harding Sewell. Cram used knowledge from his Spanish study tour that informed the architecture of the Julia Idison building to design the Sewell House. Thick walls, exposed joist ceiling in the living room, vaulted dining room ceiling, interior wood shutters, and window seats. The display of seemingly random decorative elements, such as the variously shaped windows, chimneys, and roof heights, Spanish tile work, and wrought iron, was worked into a picturesque whole. Mrs. Sewell traveled to Spain with 2 experts to purchase furniture and objects for the house, including the tile seen here on the right in the loggia and used throughout the house. The Sewell's dining room photograph shows its original furniture and fixtures. The house has been updated several times and is occasionally open for tours. Many skyscrapers went up in the 20s and 30s in Houston, but the 2 most remarkable are the Niels Esperson building and the Gulf building. The Italian Renaissance detailing of the 32-story Esperson building continues to give it a strong architectural identity, even though today it is surrounded by sleek, much taller towers. Setback terraces in the upper stages of the building provided calm above the street level and vistas into the city. I love that picture. The queen of Jesse Jones' empire in Houston was the Gulf building, the top of which can be seen behind the Esperson building on the left. At 36 stories, it was Houston's tallest skyscraper from 1929 to 1963. Its stepped facade, like many tall buildings of the era in cities across the country, was inspired by Eliel Saarinen's never built but much copied Chicago Tribune building design of 1922. This was the first building in Houston to have architectural treatment on all 4 elevations. The Art Deco interior of the Gulf building is extraordinary and can be glimpsed in the burnished Benedict Nichols entrance from Main Street into the lobby beyond. Although Houstonians surely thought the moniker Golden Belt of the Sun Belt, I think it's Golden Buckle, I wrote it wrong, was a compliment, it may have been somewhat backhanded. The gaudy glitter and glitz of Texas after World War II shone brightly all over the country. In fact, Houston did burgeon with wealth and population greater than any other Sunbelt city. The buckle shone with modern residential, institutional, commercial buildings, as well as new building types. Of course, a major factor in the growth of all these Sunbelt cities was air conditioning, but Houston's conservative political climate fostered economic and job growth. There are no state income taxes, and compared to other cities its size, government in Houston was small. The free enterprise system, otherwise called corporate capitalism, combined with a pro-marketplace municipal government in a city without zoning, allowed the private sector to shape Houston, where most buildings that stand today were built after 1945. Air transportation, like water and rail, has been advantageous to the continued growth of Houston. 10 years after the Wright's historic flight, Houston entered the forefront of aviation history when Texas City was selected as headquarters for the first Aero Squadron to train Army pilots in 1913. And then Ellington Field opened in 1917 to train World War II pilots. There were small private airports around Houston, including one owned by the lumberman W.T. Carter on Telephone Road. In 1937, the city bought Carter Field and constructed a terminal in 1940 and named it the Houston Municipal Airport, which was, like the new City Hall, funded by the Works Projects Administration. Atlanta and Houston were the first Sunbelt cities to have commercial airfields. This airport was overcrowded in only a decade when the city began to plan the Houston International Airport, now called Hobby, built at the other end of the same runways. Hobby's most distinctive space, the semicircular, fully glazed waiting room that was canted over the baggage handling area, was swallowed up in additions completed in 2008. One of the new building types, the neighborhood strip shopping center, went in all over Houston during this period. Most used architecture to lure drivers into their shops, and they all had convenient parking in front. The Lamar River Oak Shopping Center used 2 of the most popular strategies, a vertical pylon and a stylish end cap. Gulfgate Mall, on the other hand, was not a neighborhood strip center. It was a regional shopping center. It was located on the first Gulf Freeway interchange at the LaPorte Freeway. Surrounded by a sea of vast parking lots, the spacious circulation areas inside, the skylit interiors, and potscaping made for a pleasant place to shop. More importantly, it was one of the first, and sometimes claims to have been the first, air-conditioned malls in America. I think there really was one before it. Meanwhile, as Colbert would say, just south of downtown, the Texas Medical Center began to take shape. Herman Hospital was built in 1925 on part of the Hermann Park property, one half of which was undeveloped in the early 1940s. The MD Anderson Foundation, which had managed to lure a state-funded cancer center to Houston, approached the city about selling 134 acres of park property for the cancer center and other hospitals. To attract voters, Kenneth Fransheim prepared a conceptual plan that imagined the medical center as individual buildings, apparently all designed by Fransheim, in settings that would be a lovely park-like setting and an addition to Hermann Park. A citywide referendum to sell the property passed with only 951 votes when the population of Houston was about 200,000. The aerial view of the medical center shows Herman Hospital and the new Baylor College of Medicine almost completed at the center of the slide. Of course, the medical center never looked like Fransheim ideal, and today is fully built up, a city unto itself. Note the early buildings of Rice across Main Street and Palmer Church standing in the lower left just below the triangular road. The strip of land between Fannin and Main did not belong to the park and was not part of the nonprofit medical center. There, medically related for-profit institutions were built up over the course of the 20th century. The ill-fated Shamrock Hotel was a perfect manifestation of the Golden Buckle. It celebrated the wildcatter Glenn McCarthy's Irish heritage with 63 shades of green on the interior. It was the largest hotel built in the United States in the 1940s and was to have been a centerpiece for McCarthy Center, a city within a city that was never built. But it did foreshadow such developments that came later, such as Greenway Plaza, Collins Center, and the Allen Center downtown. The Shamrock was not great architecture, but it was great theater. The drawings that show Mrs. Schofield's murals for the many club rooms are wonderful. Those banquettes, I'm sure, were green velvet. The most significant architectural addition to Houston during this period was Mies van der Rohe's Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. The first phase was Cullinan Hall, designed with a fan-shaped gallery that mirrored the curve of Bissonnette with white steel framing and a dramatic curtain wall. The wide walkway to the entrance was flanked by grass lawns that in the master plan were to be the site of the Brown Pavilion, which was not completed until after Mies died. But it was faithful to his plans, and the top, if you look at the floor plans, the top of each floor plan is the original neoclassical William Ward Watkin building with side additions. And then the center part is Cullinan Hall. And then at the bottom, the Brown Pavilion was constructed with a second floor gallery and entrance lobby and theater below. The steel framing of the Brown Pavilion was painted black instead of white like Cullinan Hall here. Houston's only official nickname is Space City. Texas politicians and businessmen did not take no for an answer when Pensacola was initially announced to be the site of NASA's new manned spacecraft center. How Houston ultimately got NASA is a textbook story of political influence, private sector intervention, and power that I have in the book. I don't have time to go into it, but it's quite interesting. NASA's first Houston headquarters was the Farnsworth and Chambers building, designed by McKee and Camrath in 1957 for a construction company. It is now the headquarters of the Houston Parks Department. NASA was in part responsible for the economic boom that occurred in the 1960s and 70s. During the 5 terms of Mayor Louis Welch from 1964 to 73, Houston achieved a reputation as a city where anything goes. Welch's strong anti-zoning and pro-business policies turned real estate developers into urban planners. Houston led the nation in housing starts in the 1970s, but many lower income and minority neighborhoods were passed over when most residential construction occurred farther and farther reaching suburbs. By 1980, almost 3 million people lived in Houston, and over 500,000 of them were African Americans who primarily lived in older inner city neighborhoods. Oh, the Astrodome. Some wealthy Houston businessmen longed for a major league baseball team and found they would never get one without a major league stadium. The scheming began by George Kirksey, Bill Kirkland, and Craig Cullinan in 1956. They formed the Houston Sports Association and with other investors began a search for a stadium site. When R.E. Bob Smith finally was persuaded to donate the land he owned in Southwest Houston, their work had just begun. It was County Judge Roy Hofheinz who decided that Houston needed a one-of-a-kind, futuristic stadium that was weatherproof and multi-purpose. They hired architects and built a model of the proposed dome stadium. Kirksey, Cullinan, and Smith and Hofheinz took the model to Chicago in 1960. They presented it to the Owners Association on October 17th. I remember that because it's my birthday. And the same day, they were given a National League franchise. At first, they were called the Houston Colt, not Buffaloes, they were Buffaloes before, Houston Colt 45. The team had a temporary stadium built in what was the parking lot of the Astrodome, what became the parking lot of the Astrodome. It is amazing to realize that the Astrodome is 18 stories high and covers 9.5 acres. Now, I want you to take a careful look at the image on the right because I fell in love with it and had to pay $500 to use it. It is the most expensive photograph in the book. I used to show a map of my hometown, Savannah, in every lecture I gave, but from now on, I'm going to always find a way to get this picture in to make it worthwhile. I had to cut out Jones Hall, the Allen Theater, and a discussion of our great theater district to show these pictures, but you can see all of those buildings downtown for yourselves today. What are no longer visible are the skyboxes of the Astrodome. This was another Hofheinz inspiration. 53 boxes, each with a different theme. I hope you can read the names of them. Outrageous is an understatement. These club rooms outglitz even the Shamrock Hotel. Folks, the Astrodome is Houston's Eiffel Tower. It's Houston's Empire State Building, and we must save it. Google the Astrodome Conservancy, and you will find many ways to join the effort to purposefully reuse this great iconic building. My personal dream would be to convert the Astrodome to a hotel and reinstate the skybox themes as luxury suites with giant screen TVs showing old Astros and Houston Oilers games. The only architectural movement that actually started in Houston is the Tin House movement. It began with Jean Aubrey. Dominique and John de Menil invited Aubrey to dinner in November 1968. And as the meal concluded, John mentioned that they needed a 6,000 square foot building in 10 weeks for an exhibition that the Niels Rice Arts Institute was bringing to Houston from the Museum of Modern Art in New York in late March. And he wanted Jean, quote, to draw it. The exhibition closed in New York on February 9th and was scheduled to travel to Houston and open the next month. The three sat around the dinner table discussing possibilities that could be constructed in 8 weeks. And Aubrey came up with the idea of cladding a shed-like wood frame building with galvanized sheet iron, which could be put up cheaply and quickly. And in its subversive rejection of durability and stylishness, it symbolized American modernism's counterculture at the end of the 1960s. John de Menil was elated. He got up from the table and called the general contractor, Jervy Bell, at home right away. Bell responded, "We'll be there in the morning." As Aubrey observed, that's the way Mr. D worked. Rice, understanding that this was only a temporary building, provided a site at the edge of the campus in one corner of the stadium parking lot. The shed-like building, affectionately known as the Art Barn, stood for 45 years until its demolition. Aubrey went on to design a pair of attached houses out of the same material for the art dealer Frederica Heiner and her friend Simone Swan, executive vice president of the Meal Foundation at the time. The small scale and corrugated metal walls blended into the affordable neighborhoods already dotted with pre-engineered metal buildings. Other architects and even people outside of Houston art circles fell in love with the ethos. And many tin houses, a term coined by Hunter, were built in middle class and working class neighborhoods in parts of Houston. Then the idea spread through Texas and beyond. When Aubrey designed the Art Barn, he was still in partnership with Howard Barnstone. However, Howard was hospitalized for a major depression at the time and was not involved with that project. Likewise, Barnstone had very little to do with the Rothko Chapel, the work for which Barnstone and Aubrey are most famous. The Rothko Chapel is the result of a 6-year saga involving the donors, Dominique and John DeMenil, the architect Phillip Johnson, and the artist Mark Rothko. In 1964, the Menils commissioned Rothko to paint a series of canvases for the Catholic chapel at the University of St. Thomas. As time went on, Johnson's efforts to satisfy Rothko's criticisms became insurmountable, and the chapel site was moved off of the academic mall when the needs of the university appeared secondary. Rothko wanted a simple frame for his work, not an architectural statement by Johnson. The Menils sided with Rothko and Johnson bowed out in 1967. The next year, the Basilian Fathers withdrew from the chapel altogether. The Menils decided to build it anyway off campus and asked Barnstone and Aubrey to design it, take over. They also found working with Dominique DeMenil and Rothko difficult. Aubrey said, quote, "We drove ourselves to distraction over it. We made about 8 miniature chapels, each time incorporating some new scheme Dominique came up with. She would have us set up these models, and then she would call in architects from all over the world to give her ideas on how to make them work. What a circus. Must have been fun." During the design phase, Barnstone was hospitalized and Aubrey finished the chapel design with Phillip Johnson consulting on the entrance. The Rothko Chapel is one of Houston's most iconic buildings. It is recently reopened after an 18-month restoration. Although the Menils brought Phillip Johnson to Houston in 1948 to design their house, then the master plan and initial buildings of the University of St. Thomas, Johnson's relationship with the developer Gerald Hines provided Houston with some of its most admired skyscrapers. I.S. Brockstein, the custom woodwork manufacturer, owned 17 acres near the Galleria on Post Oak. In leasing the property to Hines for development, Brockstein asked him to consider Phillip Johnson as the architect for the project, probably at the urging of his son Raymond, who was an architecture school graduate of Rice University. The initial building, on Post Oak Central, was Phillip Johnson's first project for Hines, and many followed. 3 sleek neo-Art Deco towers were built, all banded with black panels and alternating silvery glass. Each building is 24 stories tall with setbacks at the 12th and 22nd floors. In 1970, Hugh and Bill Littke, chairman and president of Pennzoil, approached Hines about building a tower for their company. Hines initially commissioned SOM, but the Litkes wanted something more unusual, not a flat-top corporate skyscraper. They interviewed several architects and selected Johnson Berge, who were working on the preliminary designs for Post Oak Central at the time. Since Pennzoil wanted only 4,000 square feet, Hines needed a second tenant to make the development on a full block site profitable. Hines asked Johnson for a building that could have a double image for 2 major clients. Pennzoil Place is composed of 2 trapezoidal buildings with their tops sliced at 45-degree counter-sloped angles and sheathed in dark bronze aluminum and glass curtain wall. A 10-foot wide slot dramatically separates the 2 36-story towers. Pennzoil Place attracted so many pre-construction tenants that Hines had to add 2 floors while the building was under construction. Johnson had been working in more abstract terms, and the 2 towers he devised for Pennzoil were more minimal than anything he had done up to that time. The New York Times architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable called Pennzoil Place the building of the decade. H-Town is the most popular nickname for Houston today. It was first used in the music industry after the H-Town Arena Theater opened in 1965, and the popular R&B group H-Town formed in 1992. As in the Space City era, where everything was named Astro something, today H-Town has become a popular name for dozens of businesses, from H-Town bail bonds to H-Town Soccer Club. In the last 2 decades of the 20th century, Houston seems to have finally discovered the rich cultural heritage that goes far deeper than its white Anglo-Christian past. Even though poor economic environment from 1982 to 87 almost halted all new construction, Houston recovered and invested in museums and other institutions that signals its diverse and maturing attitudes and populace. For many years, small non-Judeo-Christian groups worshiped in the privacy of their own homes. But by the 1870s, purpose-built temples and mosques began to appear in Houston. These buildings became some of the first public indicators of the wide ethnic diversity evolving in the Houston population. The first Hindu temple to attract attention in Houston was the marble and granite Sri Meenakshi Devasthanam, built between 1982 and 1984. More than 20 stone artisans created the intricate carvings. This was the third Hindu temple, only the third Hindu temple built in the United States, and it's the only one outside of India dedicated to the goddess Meenakshi. The temple is configured with a decorative outer wall with 4 main gateways, one of which is seen here. They lead to an inner courtyard where the east-facing prayer hall is at the center. It has a lively interior with colorful Hindu symbols and decoration. The temple sits on a 23-acre campus that contains several educational buildings, offices, and dormitories for priests. Behind the gold drapery is the Sanctum Sanctorum shrine to Meenakshi, but I didn't get to see that. A serene and beautiful Buddhist complex consisting of several pagodas in a lush garden setting filled with statuary is located in Southwest Houston on a bend of Keegan's Bayou. From the street, sacred lions atop 4 tall carved pillars flank the beginning of a long entry sequence lined with palm trees. 12 traditional concrete lanterns, 6 per side, line the walkway that extends to a bowed brick bridge across a koi-filled lagoon. On the interior, the temple, low leather-covered banks provide seating facing the great Buddha. Customary offerings of fresh fruit and flowers surround the Buddha. Behind the Buddha screen, a large room with a library filled with glass front bookcases, plants, flowers, and fruit is a shrine to ancestors of the congregation members. Amid the furniture and musical instruments, ancestral photographs line the walls. Incense constantly burns in the temple, and throughout the complex, peaceful Vietnamese chanting is broadcast, heightening a sacred atmosphere there. Dominique and John de Menil's Menil Foundation between 71 and 1974 bought 71 lots around the Rothko Chapel in Montrose as a land bank for an eventual construction of museum and study center for their very significant art collection. In 1974, Howard Barnstone painted all of the bungalows on the Menil property gray with white trim, what lightheartedly began to be called Deauville after Dominique de Menil. This act of urban planning had a major impact on the eventual design of the Menil collection. After working with Louis Kahn, who proposed demolition of all the great bungalows, John de Menil died in 1973, and then Kahn died a few months later in 1974. The resulted hiatus, during which Kahn's grandiose plan was abandoned, Howard Barnstone developed several preliminary plans for a scaled-down project. But Mrs. de Menil ended up commissioning the Italian architect Renzo Piano. She told Piano that she wanted a building that looked small on the outside, but as large as possible on the inside. She also wanted her collection to be displayed in natural light as it was at her home. Piano succeeded in making the high ceiling, simply finished galleries intimate and restful. On the second floor, the treasure house, so-called, contains some storage and spacious rooms for scholars. A below-ground storage area houses most of the collection. On the exterior, the exposed white steel frame is infilled with gray cypress clapboard, painted barnstone gray to coordinate with the bungalows, making an aesthetically unified, if slightly unreal, neighborhood. Piano called the graceful S-curved light baffles leaves. Natural light from the baffles is augmented with artificial light, but the light diffusion of piano's leaves imbues the space with a luminescent quality enhanced by the dark stained wood floors, analogous to the black tile floors of the Menil house. Not physically far but architecturally miles away from the Menil collection is the Boisterous Children's Museum of Houston. Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi developed their concept of the decorated shed in their book with Stephen Eisenhower, Learning from Las Vegas. The Children's Museum is a decorated shed constructed of two pre-engineered metal buildings. Instead of caryatids, classical figures that support entablatures on their heads, Venturi cleverly used what he called carry-a-kids to hold up the shed awning at the school bus drop-off area. Jackson and Ryan completed a 3-story metal face addition in 2009. Although one of my purposes in writing this book was to celebrate the work of professional architects, there are some parts of Houston's built environment that were not professionally designed, but cannot be ignored. One example, perhaps the best example, is the Orange Show, built by a Houston mailman in a 26-year span. Jeff McKissick built this monument to the orange, which he believed brought good luck and long life because it transmitted energy from the other orange orb, the sun. After his death, a nonprofit foundation was formed to preserve what has become one of the most celebrated folk art installations in the United States. The Orange Show is an integral part of Houston's cultural life through a variety of programs. Its 3,000 square foot maze-like environment includes upper decks, a stage, a museum, and a shop. And it's constructed of concrete, brick, and steel with found objects such as gears, tiles, wheels, mannequins, statues, and what have you, tractor seats. In 1983, 3 important skyscrapers were completed in Houston just before construction slowdown that reflected Houston's depressed economy. The 71-story Allied Bank building has a sleek green cladding, the color of money, and its offset quarter circle footprint is said to imitate a dollar sign. Ed Bassett and Larry Doan of SOM San Francisco office not only produced a building whose curving facade creates a sense of movement and expansiveness, they acknowledged street life with a pair of basement level courtyards facing Louisiana to provide a connection between the street and the vast tunnel system below Houston's downtown, which many of you may not realize exists unless you work or have been downtown touring. Phillip Johnson veered away from his sculptural minimalism of the 1970s and began to rely on historical models for his buildings. The year before, his famous AT&T building in Manhattan generated attention with its postmodern Chippendale top. Johnson designed the 56-story Republic Bank Center with 3 Dutch gables climbing the face of its red granite-clad tower. The Enron building, with its sexy oval shape and mirrored facade, was designed by Arthur Jones of Lloyd Jones and Brewer. The 50-story building is faced with reflective glass separated by thin white aluminum spandrels that encircle the building. Enron Center, the Enron building's little sister that can be seen behind the original, is a 40-story tower designed by Caesar Pelli and Kendall Heaton in 2002 as an homage to the Enron building. Actually, it's a copy. The only thing that's different are the protruding spandrels and the treatment at the summit. We're getting to the end. I know I'm running out of time. I'll speak fast. Houston's relentless expansion has continued since the turn of the 21st century, and even though the economy is far more diverse than it has ever been, fossil fuels remain the city's lifeline. In 2010, Mayor Niels Parker began to use the term Petro Metro to describe Houston. Petro Metro is a cooler, updated version of the nickname energy capital of the world, and it also alludes to the vast number of miles many Houstonians drive every day to the jobs far from where they can afford to live. In modern residential construction, the popularity of glazed flat roof Mesian houses gave way to the white boxes inspired by Le Corbusier. Such houses began with two radical residents in Stuttgart, Germany, the Weisendorf Houses. Corbusier promoted 5 components for modern houses: a raised structure for usable space underneath, a decoration-free facade of non-supporting walls, an open floor plan, ribbon windows, and a rooftop garden made possible by flat roofs. And this was, now remember, in 1927, and these tenets are what we think of as important new ideas today, like the open floor plan. The smooth white surfaces and blocky massing of Le Corbusier, yeah, that's what it says, Le Corbusier's houses continue to inspire architects today. One such project in Houston received national attention when the American Institute of Architects recognized it with a Housing Design Award in 2007. Collaborative Design Works designed and built this 4-unit complex on an in-town lot and labeled it the 505 after its address. The property could have held 5 units, but the architect, Jim Evans, said that increasing space around the units allowed for more windows, which he configured to frame views and retaining privacy. These windows and balconies cutouts where wood sheathed walls contrast with the white stucco, provide a striking architectural statement. The cutouts cleverly form a giant 5 in the stucco beginning just below the roof. The duplexes share a 3rd floor roof deck. This project uses many strategies to achieve environmental responsible footprint, from an old-fashioned cross ventilation to recycled and sustainable materials. The young Houston architect Ryan Gordon designed a 6,400 square foot house and memorial for clients who asked for a French Norman inspired house with minimal landscaping and an open interior. As I said, a common program component for young families today. The white exterior is composed of slurried brick and limestone, walls of smooth plaster with minimal trim, contrast on the interior with reclaimed French oak floors, beams, and old Parisian doors. Such use of reclaimed materials is another 21st century trend in recent houses that provides new construction with both satisfying patina and environmental accountability. The O'Donnell House shows that some families with the means to hire an architect and build their dream house want something that functions for a growing family with small children, provides flexible spaces for entertaining, and looks traditional and modern at the same time, a sophisticated brand of postmodernism. Wealthy Houstonians, although generally architecturally conservative, live large and ostentatiously. In the 1920s and 30s, John Staub and Virgil Briscoe built such derivative houses with charm and elegance. Nationally, such large houses, usually built on estates or at least very large lots, were called country houses. In the 21st century, the Houston firm Curtis and Wyndham have refined this proclivity with a beautiful academic execution of traditional house forms. They have demonstrated skill in interpreting a wide variety of historical models, and although their work is derivative, it is original in that it incorporates the spatial preferences and technologies of modern life. These 2 stair halls, although very different, illustrate the grace and detail with which these houses were designed and constructed. The rambling English-style house on Willowick unfolds along the banks of Buffalo Bayou and River Oaks. The varied massing and branch-like plan used solid timber posts and brackets, stone walls, and a cedar-shake roof to anchor the house in a woodland setting. The Inverness House looks to La Laterne, an 18th century French hunting lodge near Versailles, for its architectural precedent. The main house and wings are only 1 room deep, which is why it's so interesting. And they have large windows that give the interior an open, airy, light-filled mien. The house is clad in Texas limestone and sited on formal landscape grounds. My favorite green building in Houston is the Rice Data Center. Ha ha. Technology has overtaken our lives, and Rice's Fondren Library, it really is my favorite green building. Rice's Fondren Library responded by building an offsite storage facility for little used digitized books when they revamped their library. The storage facility can hold up to 2 million volumes and is kept at 50 degrees and 30-degree humidity, ideal for archival storage of paper. And this shows how just an industrial building that can be beautiful in its landscape of just green grass. But to get serious about green buildings, the UT Health Science Center led the way in Houston for environmentally responsible buildings when they held a national competition in 1996 for a new nursing school in the Texas Medical Center. After a 4-year budget struggle, that building was constructed to the designs of BNIM. 4 years after the School of Nursing opened, the Houston City Council adopted a green building resolution in 2004 that established LEED certification as a standard for new construction and major renovations to city-owned property. In 2005, AI Houston began its annual Green Building Conference called Gulf Coast Green, which has brought thousands of participants to hear experts speak on environmentally sensitive design along the Gulf Coast. In 2006, the NIM had a chance to refine their environmental and design strategies in the Seraphim Research Building. The Seraphim Building has a central atrium between the administrative and laboratory wings, a red terracotta rain screen that eliminates air pressure differentials across the exterior wall to reduce moisture drawn into the wall is one of the building's many sustainable features. Windows on the building's long, narrow slabs provide natural light. One of the most recent and perhaps most surprising development in Houston has been a citywide commitment in both private and public sectors to concentrate on developing and revitalizing green space. From the air, Houston's tree canopy is impressive, but on the ground, public parks have been unkempt and underappreciated. Healthful outdoor activity has become a priority in much of the country, and Houstonians have begun to want convenient places to exercise and relax. And all this was before COVID. Discovery Green is a large downtown park adjacent to the George R. Brown Convention Center. The Discovery Green Conservancy was established in 2004 to work with the city in a public-private partnership. It was a $125 million project that gave downtown a large, well-programmed space that welcomes tourists and residents. The park has inspired the development of several high-rise hotels and apartment towers around its perimeters. Hermann Park, the oldest urban park in Houston, began a remarkable renewal in the 1980s that culminated in 2016, the year of its 100th birthday, with the completion of the 1995 master plan developed by the landscape architect Laurie Olin from Philadelphia. In essentially 20 years, the Hermann Park Conservancy has restored the park's historic elements and completed major improvement projects, developed stewardship programs, including reforestation, and opened the McGovern Centennial Gardens. In 2015, the Conservancy retained Michael Van Valkenburg to develop a master plan for the next 20 years. Buffalo Bayou Partnership has worked for over 25 years to bring landscape access to Buffalo Bayou. Thompson Design Group of Boston, an international leader in waterfront development, created a 20-year master plan issued in 2002. The restoration and revitalization work continues according to this plan. With over 1,500 wooded acres, Memorial Park is Houston's largest urban park. After a tree-killing drought and Hurricane Ike in 2011, the park was in sad shape, prompting the formation of the Memorial Park Conservancy in the mold of the successful Hermann Park Conservancy. The Memorial Park Conservancy, in collaboration with the Houston Parks and Recreation Department and Uptown Houston, is leading the effort to restore and revitalize Memorial Park through long-range planning, master planning effort approved by the City Council in 2015. I know my time is up. I know it's overtime, so I think we will go to questions. I don't know.
You're fine, Barrie. Thank you very much. I know it was hard to to whittle all this down to an hour. For those of you that have not seen Barrie's book, again, it's for sale on the Heritage Society website, heritagesociety.org. But she did a great job in putting all this together in 1 hour, because there is a lot more to be read and enjoyed in the book. So thank you, Barrie, very much.
How do you do this?
For the,
I can't see you. Press escape.
oh, I don't have my video on right now. I can try this. Here I am. So for those of you that weren't here at the beginning, I'm Paul Homeyer, and I am going to be fielding questions for Barrie that were submitted in the Q&A. We still got about almost 20 minutes. There are 6 questions in the Q&A now, so there's probably maybe time to still submit sorry, I'm not looking off into the distance, but I'm having a little AV issues here. But I'll go ahead and start the questions, but you can continue to submit questions in the Q&A, and I will direct them to Barrie since everybody's muted. Right now we've got 6 questions. The first one is from Sharon Sampson. What was the name and address of the River Oaks home that was occasionally open for tours? The bottom of the slide was not visible.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Cleveland Sewell House. It's on Inwood. Oh gosh. Now I can't look at it. I made it go away. This is terrible.
The Sewell House?
It's the Sewell House on Inwood.
And you can buy the book and it probably gives you the address, right?
I was looking it up while you
Okay. Next question from Nora Laus. Do you think Houston in the second half of the 19th century had the same architectural status as someplace like Chicago?
Second half. Houston was always behind the sort of architectural, the things going on the East Coast in Chicago. I think it began to catch up in the 70s, 1970s, not before that, with Phillip Johnson's work and other work that was done here. So no, not through the whole second half of the 20th century, but certainly the last 2 or 3 decades, I think it did catch up and was as good.
And then a second question from Nora. Were also so much of the 19th and early 20th century buildings have been since destroyed? I guess in Houston.
I'll speak to that because which I do talk about in that book and have talked about before. Houston had so many waves of prosperity, just one after the other. They could afford to tear down. I grew up, as I said, in Savannah. And of course, I think most people here know Galveston. Both of those towns are beautiful examples of preserved historic buildings. Well, the reason is they were so poor at the turn of the century, and they went through really bottomed out, and they couldn't afford to tear anything down because they couldn't afford to build anything new. And I think Houston so many times ongoing. And so that's why really lost so much of its old architecture because it didn't need it. You know, they could build what they thought was bigger and better. I'm looking at the Sewell.
Okay. Next question from Nora Seguro. What do you think of the new Kinder building with the MFA?
Well, you know what? I don't like it. I think the Montrose side on the plaza or whatever they call it, patio, looks inviting. I haven't seen, it's not fair because I haven't been inside, but I think those rounded things on the side are very odd. However, George Lancaster of Hines put up a picture on Facebook yesterday of it at night, and it was just breathtaking. So perhaps I'm not giving it a chance. I need to look at it more or go look at it at night. I hope that the program, I've talked to Craig Miner at Miner Design, a good friend, and he's been doing all the signage there, and he thinks it's going to be wonderful, and that it's, you know, once they get all the things worked out. But right now, I have some red. I drove by the first time I drove by it. I went, "Eee, what are they doing?" Because I'd seen the other side, but of course that side with the hill going up was interesting. Anyway, we'll see.
Okay, next question from Jack Wetmore.
Uh-oh.
What look do you feel Houston would have if we had passed zoning laws in 1947?
What was the first part of the question?
What look do you feel Houston would have if we had passed zoning laws in 1947?
Well, I certainly, for all these years that I've been working in Houston architecture, have voted for zoning. I think I had one chance to do that, but I certainly was in the pro zoning group of, intellectuals. I'm not an intellectual, but of academics and people that really had looked at the problem and understood, urban places. And working on this book, I have begun to change my mind. I think it would look very different if we had had zoning laws. I'm not, and as I said twice, I think in the lecture tonight, and I realized I was repeating myself, but I think it's important to realize that by having this sort of, one thing you have to think of is that if you have fewer laws and you don't have zoning laws, it's very easy to take property and transfer it from one use to another. And that's what Houston's always been able to do. If somebody wants to buy a factory and tear it down and make a apartment complex, they can do it overnight. If they want to buy a subdivision and tear it down and build Greenway Plaza, which they did, they can do it overnight. You don't have to go through all of the red tape. And so I think Houston looks the way it does, and it would look very different if those things had been, slowed down. And I think Houston's progress, and a lot of conservatives will tell you that, but I think one thing that we've left behind, and it is in the book, and I do talk about, one of the problems with architectural history is that sort of the houses of middle-class people and the neighborhoods of working-class people are not often discussed, described, photographed. They're not built by architects. They go up overnight and go down overnight. And I think that is one of the problems, because I think that Houston has not addressed in its public housing. One thing I didn't say about the book I'd like to say now is every chapter has a sidebar that is kind of something that really didn't fit into a whole chronological discussion that tries to address those kinds of things. One is on public housing and the sort of history of public housing in Houston. One is on the wards. It goes through all the wards and tells who has lived in them and how they progressed and how they developed. I can't remember them all now, but each, I should have the book here with me. But the sidebars, one's on Market Square and what it started, how it started out and how it went through different phases and kind of what it is today. So you couldn't really spread that out over 8 chapters and have it have any continuity or make any sense. So that's those, I hope, and the editor thought. I didn't thank my editor, Jim Burr. You were wonderful. If you're watching, thank you at UT Press. He really saw me through a lot of years of agony of trying to put this book together in a coherent way, and I think it turned out well. But to answer Jack's question, it would look like Dallas.
Okay, well, that brings me to another question. I'm kind of jumping out of order here, but this has to do with your favorite chapter. As a historical preservationist, do you have a personal favorite chapter or era? And that's from Michael.
It's from who?
From Michael Kravitz.
Oh, okay. I changed my mind for a long time, and particularly when I was working at the library, I was just all about Victorian buildings. We had the plans, George Dickey's plans of the Victorian City Hall, and I just spent hours looking at them. And I was just, I don't know, I was just fascinated by all the nooks and crannies and places, that I don't know if I left, I think I did leave out the part that said, Victorian houses, when they became so, they started making all of these little passageways and rabbit warrens of hallways and things in Victorian houses, which earlier houses did not have. Houses before the Civil War, there were just like 4 rooms and that's all you had. But the differentiation of rooms began, in the late 19th century. And I found that fascinating to see, how that developed. But now I'm not so in love with, I guess, and then when I started working at AIA, I decided that, we needed to look at what was going on now. We needed to talk to architects, young architects, old architects, any architects who were building and designing the city today, not only try to make them aware of the historic nature of the city and kind of how it had been, but then I also began to really appreciate new forms, new ideas. One of the most exciting things about doing that book was going down, and I have far more in the book of the sort of outlying temples and mosques and that sort of religious buildings that I was not familiar with. And there's so many in Houston that are so wonderful and so beautiful that I became fascinated with that. So I don't know. I just, I really don't at this moment have a favorite. It's whatever I'm studying at the time is my favorite. It's like whatever child I'm talking to, I tell them they're my favorite child.
Well, they're all the chapters are well represented in the book. Next question, you mentioned Dallas earlier, that Houston would look like Dallas if we had zoning. And this question has to do with Dallas. The question from Cynthia Tolles is, since Houston began to, air quotes, catch up in the 70s with Phillip Johnson, et cetera, would it be fair to say it caught up because of the Niels? How does Dallas compare? Does Dallas have a Niel family?
Yeah, they do. They have the, oh God, I'm not going to be able to remember. I always tell people the reason I write is because I have a bad memory. I know where to find things if I have them written down somewhere. Yes, Dallas has a number of patrons of art and architecture, as Houston does. I think most large cities do. And I've seen one of the, what is the name of those? He's a developer. Anyway, they have a Garden of Good and Evil, the Garden of Evil. Has anybody ever seen that in Dallas? This has nothing to do with the question, but he bought statues all over Europe of Stalin and Lenin and Marx and Hitler and everybody. And Trammell Crow, thank you. My husband just told me Trammell Crow. Anyway, there are a lot of, certainly Dallas has the same, people have the same idea of wanting to make their city a great place. And some, I think they succeed in some ways that maybe Houston hasn't, but I think Houston has succeeded overall in ways that Dallas hasn't. And it may well be because we have been able to so quickly turn around. If we hadn't been tearing down buildings, that would be a different story, but we've so easily been able to make different land uses possible in different parts of so that the city's grown very fast because of that.
So since the questions continue to come in now, I'm going to double up a couple questions from Cynthia Tolles again and Gretchen Scardino. Is that someone, a member of your family? What is your favorite house in Houston, and what lost building hurts you the most?
Well, my favorite house in Houston. Well, after doing this thing tonight, I have to say I have always been in love with the, I was looking at the Sewell House. You can't say a favorite house because I have favorite houses from different eras and you just can't compare them. It's like comparing apples to oranges. Now, what was the other part of the question? What she wants me to say is the O'Donnell.
What lost building hurts you the most?
Well, it's not the Shamrock, really. I have a Shamrock t-shirt still when we all went out marching. I don't know. I think probably not one building, but several Warrens Inn on Market Square. I think when the buildings went down on Market Square, when Manette and I and so many of us were out there trying to save those buildings because the whole character of the square changed. We were trying to keep it as at least one little part of Houston that spoke to the past, to the 19th century, and it didn't happen. We really were not able to save those buildings. They weren't grand necessarily grand buildings, but they were lovely. And Kennedy Bakery really is the only one left of that era that surrounded Market Square. They were little shops and different kinds of, most of them 2 and 3 and 4 stories. Minette was involved in saving a couple of buildings on Travis, is it Minette? I don't know. Anyway, she was personally involved in doing some of that with the Foley building. But I really hated to see Market Square destroyed, because I think you don't realize it was like dominoes. Once one building went, even though there are like 4 left, it's not there. It's not what it could have been.
Okay, I think I have covered all the questions so far. There were a couple that were more comments thanking you for the work that you do, and just thanking you for the presentation. I would. There was another question about the book, where it's available, asking if it was available through Barnes and Noble. It probably is, but I would say order it through the Heritage Society, and then you get an autographed copy. And it's a bit
back tomorrow to sign more books. So if you want a signed book, I would love to do that for you. The Heritage Society really needs our help. A lot of people in a lot of places need our help, but those buildings are so important that they are stewards of in Sam Houston Park. And I think the little bit of money, they're not going to make much money on selling books, but they do make the profit that a bookstore would make. I mean, they're a bookstore. So if you can, buy it from the Heritage Society or buy it local, but it's on Amazon and everywhere else. I mean, you can buy it anywhere. Fortunately, because UT Press has a wonderful distribution center, whatever.
But you get a signed copy from the Heritage Society, and I believe it's the same price as buying it elsewhere online, and they will mail it to you. So
yeah, they will mail it to you if you can't pick it up, or you can drive by and pick it up in the parking lot if you don't have a mask on or something.
So we're right at 7:30, and I'd like to thank Barrie and Minette and Rhonda and Rusty for helping to put all this together. Any closing comments or remarks from any of the panelists?
Where's Minette? She left. She's gone out to. Oh, we have to
she's here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Barrie, I just want to thank you and congratulate you on this amazing book. That's for all posterity, if anything, just that we'll all remember and know and learn from. So thank you for your decades of work in chronicling Houston's architecture and urban history. And thanks to the AIA, Rhonda, Rusty, for co-hosting this. It's great. Really terrific.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, both of you, both organizations.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm looking at everybody who listened to it. Isn't that interesting?